Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Exercise Mechanic Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Dean St. Mart. Dean, how's it going today?
Thanks a million, Etienne, and thank you, Ryan, for reaching out. All good on this side.
Amazing. Happy to hear it. I'm actually quite impressed. You said my name correctly, which doesn't happen even in
That
Canada.
never happens.
Well, obviously, my surname, St. Mart, my dad is Mauritian, so we're of French descent.
Ah, that's right. That's right. So do you speak any French at all?
I did. I was at one point fluent, but I have not spoken French in about 14 or 15 years. So my French is probably in the gutter without going back and doing some level of study or re-establishing some of the rules of grammar from French.
Right. Well, we'll keep French off the table today. We'll save it maybe for a few years down the road for perhaps a future episode. Who knows? Given your area of expertise, it's very much why we were really excited to host you on this platform today. And given that there's a ton of depth that we can potentially go into, we thought that it would be wise to perhaps start off by, defining some terms and kind of setting the stage with just like providing the initial context for this conversation. And so we were hoping that perhaps you could start off by defining what are perhaps some of the major categories when it comes to PEDs, as well as might be some examples of some compounds in each. So that way people are familiarized with some of the terms that will likely be coming back.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
I guess when we're looking at PEDs, the most, notorious one or the most widespreadly known ones are the anabolic androgenic steroids. So of the most common being testosterone, and then social media memes, you've got Trenbolone, Anavar, Oxandrolone, you've got Anadrol or Super Hulks or whatever. Each compound will have a what we'd probably call its chemical name, the compound name, and then a generic or street name.
Right.
So you've got your anabolic androgenic steroids, which are hormone-based medications to speak. You have your stimulant-based compounds. So they tend to play off the adrenergic or the adrenaline pathways of the body. So you've got several different types of adrenaline receptors within our body. Again, most common ones, probably people have heard of clenbuterol. Clenbuterol is an analog based off asthmatic medication. So salbutamol, which is the blue inhaler medication. How we came to understand clenbuterol being a performance aid. Of course, one side of it improves lung function, but the other side of it is as a consequence of activating those adrenaline receptors, it will improve thermogenesis, so the production of heat, or involuntary movement, which plays over to an increase in calorie expenditure. Then you've got, other repurposed medications when it comes to like performance enhancement. So when we look at performance enhancement, an increase in strength, an increase in endurance, an increase in aerobic capacity, all these things that play into sport or sport and performance is important. But we could then technically say that medications designed to improve different systems of the body, blood pressure, heart rate function, lung function, like clenbuterol or salbutamol, and even then going as far as the new classification, or we call it new, but they've been out probably about 12, 13 years, the GLP-1 agonists, using them for appetite suppression. So if an athlete has to make weight in a sport like combat sports or even bodybuilding, we can use these medications to suppress appetite, to eat less, to lose body weight. We have, on top of the adrenergic stimulants, you've got psychostimulants. So you got stuff that plays on your brain. And probably like the most well-known psychostimulant is caffeine. And then beyond caffeine, I've got a cup of coffee. Beyond caffeine, you then have, you're getting into the more amphetamine derived compounds that will then really massively increase dopamine release of your brain. So again, higher dopamine, you're more motivated, but you've also then got more, I guess, control over your attention, which can, skill based sports then would play over to better accuracy or better like skill acquisition with training and performance. And then I guess at the very bottom of all, then the murky side of PEDs is the hiding of the use, and that is, using stuff that gets rid of these compounds out of the body. So diuretics, medications designed to remove fluid from the body or excrete more fluid quickly from the kidneys. And so obviously a lot of these compounds get broken down by your liver, they get broken down and then get excreted in your urine through your kidneys. So if we can speed up the rate of fluid loss from the kidneys, in theory we can speed up the removal of these metabolites from the body quicker. So I guess you've got one side hormone-based performance enhancement, and then the other side is small molecule-based or medication-based. It really depends, a bodybuilder is going to use different PEDs to a cyclist, and a cyclist is going to use different PEDs to a boxer or a combat sports athlete. So it really comes down to, analyzing what's required of the sport that's being done. Bodybuilding is all about muscularity. So they're going to use compounds that enhance muscle protein synthesis and improve training performance to gather that protein or that muscle protein. Whereas a cyclist is going to look more for explosive power. So that's not to say that they might not use some level of nervous system stimulation from a hormone, but they're going to look more towards performance enhancement from an aerobic capacity. So being able to carry more oxygen, being able to cycle for longer, being able to withstand a higher threshold of lactic acid for a longer period of time than a normal person. And then similarly, you've got your fighter who might be using PEDs to speed up injury recovery. So whether they've gotten, a very bad wound from a combat event, or to improve their explosive strength, so that kicking ability, knockout ability, everything like that is improved from their performance side. So it really, there's not like a universal handbook of performance enhancement. It really comes down to what that person needs from their sport.
I find that so interesting because I think at least I myself, I'm less well-read than Ryan, and definitely less well-read than you, Dean. And, superficially, if someone was to ask me, name some PEDs, I would probably just start rhyming off various products and testosterone and what have you, without perhaps making reference to, PEDs, I guess you could say technically is context specific. Like, a PED for, I don't know, a competitive chess player might not be, I don't know, it might be an odd example, but like they might be leaning more so towards like cognitive ones, psychoactive ones, in contrast to ones that enhance muscularity. And so talking about how performance is context dependent and sport specific, I really appreciate you bringing that in, and it shows your mastery already of the subject. That typically, anytime that someone leads with nuance in contrast to absolute statements, you can kind of tell that they know their shit. So I really appreciate you starting with that. That was really informative.
Yeah, I mean, even like the term, to be like politically correct these days, they don't like the term performance enhancing drug anymore. It's like performance enhancing substance or performance enhancing compound, because drug has a very negative connotation, whereas a substance could be anything. For a period of time, as crazy as it sounds, caffeine was banned by the International Olympic Committee. So you couldn't take caffeine as an Olympic athlete because
the Italians were screwed. The Italians.
So, when you look at it from that perspective, someone drinking a cup of coffee, you're performance enhancing as an Olympic athlete. As absurd as it sounds, that substance was deemed ergogenic, and if abused, brought sporting benefits. So we have to view, performance enhancing drugs, PEDs, does have a negative connotation with the public of, these are harmful drugs. But at the basis of it, a substance like caffeine is technically a PED. And that's where, you can see some crazy things. If you look at, the WADA banned list, they're adding stuff that you wouldn't even think is a performance enhancing substance. But they've deemed it, if you abuse something that in theory could be a natural aid, it's an unfair advantage over someone else.
Very interesting.
And I guess that this is, this all stemmed from I was, invited to be one of the advisors for the enhanced games. And this is, when you're having these conversations, aside from, health detriments or whatever of some of these performance enhancers, we have to think of one side of the enhanced games. Of the beauty of it is, well, what happens if you just remove the limitations of, we know full and well that from all of the failed drug tests that a lot of top tier athletes use these substances, and it's Russian roulette who gets caught if they're not careful. If you remove that and you make it not a free for all, but you control in the confines of sport of using these substances, of where human elite performance can lie without any roadblocks, and having I guess a controlled way of monitoring health and being able to advise that what you're doing now is beyond the point of safe limits or risk aversity, you then sort of then look at the other aspect, which is like human evolution. And I interestingly, we know we have muscle memory. So if someone uses anabolic steroids, one of the consequences of it is it will increase the amount of myonuclei, the amount of nuclei in your muscle cells, and you never lose them. So that if you go back, if you stop using steroids, in theory, if you're intelligent with your training and your nutrition, you can maintain quite an amount of what you've gained from that exposure to the steroids themselves, rather than continuously having to take them. The other side of it then that, that I've really thought heavily about, and with the book that I was writing, is we know that these things work on a genetic level. So again, you've got drugs that are working on your genetics, and you've got drugs that just work on the system itself, on an enzyme or something in the system itself. If something is working on a genetic capacity, we know that obviously we inherit our genetics from our parents, or we pass our genetics to our children. But obviously one of the things that people are always worried about, especially with steroid use, is if I'm taking steroids and I have children, is it going to cause birth defects? And they've never been able to associate the use of steroids with the increased rate of a birth defect. But because they work on a genetic level, from the androgen receptor in your genetics, you express your genes based on your environment, the whole concept of epigenetics. Your genes, you inherit your genes, and whether they're on or off is dependent on lifestyle, diet, nutrition, environment, etc. If you're taking androgens and you're taking steroids, and you have an increased ability for muscle protein synthesis, and your genetics are switched on towards increased muscle protein synthesis or increased neural activation in your nervous system for strength, when you have a child and you're using these compounds, are you passing those favorable epigenetics to that child unknowingly or knowingly, in that you're now setting up your child to be an elite athlete based on your drug choices as a top tier athlete? And that might be a reason why you sort of see certain families become sporting elite. There is genetics involved, but if there is genetics involved, those who don't express these genes but then do through their choices of anabolics or drugs, are they setting their child up to be an elite javelin thrower or shot put thrower or wrestler or combat sports based on what they done as a parent, passing their genetics on? And I raised this when we had our conversations at the Enhanced Games of, we're not just playing with this generation. Your choices on your own epigenetics influence the next generations.
I'm so happy you brought that up because Ryan and I prior today, I was like, I definitely want to like double click on this because I find that so interesting. And you brought up a really great point that I find you see in other sports, but we don't necessarily see it in perhaps athletics, which is, I'm a fan of Formula One, so we'll use that as an example, or even just auto racing. They like in so many ways, these various constructors involved in these sports will leverage going to the extremes as a means of innovating for the masses. There are very tangible and practical uses to pushing things to see what are the limits, and then when we discover that limit, can we then evolve the engineering, or in the case of humans, can we evolve ourselves as a means of getting better? And you see that in other contexts, and I think it's really interesting that you brought that into this conversation about one of the potential benefits, perhaps, of embracing enhanced sport. I think that's really interesting.
I mean, even one aspect, and I was involved in a discussion. I wouldn't say debate, but the discussion was surrounding external enhancement. And like you said there, like Formula One racing is a clear example of external enhancement. So how can you tweak the engine? How can you change the aerodynamics of the body of the vehicle? How can we improve I guess internal systems within the car to help feed back to the driver in terms of their ability to control the car? When we look at enhancement, yes, one side of it is biological enhancement is probably the best way to say it, of to our
Right.
own systems of the body. But external enhancement combined with actual performance enhancement substances, that is a whole other realm, even when it comes to like the enhanced sort of games aspect. I mean, I brought up, I guess the last Olympics, we've seen all the ridiculousness of shooting, rifle shooting, of how technical it goes into building a gun and all the systems within the gun to help improve the accuracy of the shooter. I mean, we go one step beyond it. Now we're putting, as crazy as it sounds, we're probably not too far off of putting, AI-based retinas into, an athlete's body. So now they have predictive-based analysis of, aim here, you've got a 95% chance of hitting bullseye, change path trajectory of your hand, 2 degrees and now you're bullseye. You've got a whole feedback system, like as crazy as like Marvel-based, science fiction. That in it of itself is enhancement as well. That slowly humanity is moving towards this, I guess, bio-robotic or biotechnological aspect, that we're not even just looking at the aspect of using steroids to get bigger, stronger muscles. One of the sides to like the enhanced games, I guess, declaration or treaty was that you wouldn't be allowed to disfigure yourself in order to become a better athlete. So if, say, for example, we developed a very strong set of bionic legs, you couldn't just go, okay, I'm going to chop off my lower limb to put these bionic legs on to be the best athlete in the world. There's a guidance in terms of what would be acceptable from an ethical perspective, but also from an evolutionary based point of view. So yeah, that was a very interesting thing to be a part of, to come at it from the angle of being someone who's involved with like pharmacology and performance enhancing drugs and substances, to then being able to say, external enhancement, future epigenetics, we have to be very mindful of what we're doing currently and what it's passing down to the next generation.
I think cool. You brought up a really interesting point there, because my perception, I think like a lot of people, I'm fascinated at this idea of having this game, this participation where people aren't limited by, the WADA drug testing. Or I think of, I remember the Olympic swimsuit from a few Olympics ago that they banned because all the times were being broken. But I guess as you start to think about it, athletes are just driven to win by any means necessary. So then you end up in this situation where, maybe the initial thought is like, let's remove all of these barriers to performance and see what they can do. And then you go, wait, these people might do anything to win. So then where then is that cap? Like, where are those boundaries of, we need to find a way to protect these people from harming themselves? So I don't know if you, like, I imagine those are conversations that are discussed, but can you give us maybe an idea roughly what like the parameters are around, like, okay, this is where we're going to restrict the things that they can and can't do?
That is currently still something that is being very hotly debated within that, within the community of who's on that committee. And you've pretty much nailed it. My, I guess, feedback was, well, how do you define healthy? So part of the enhanced is like the Declaration of Human Enhancement. So you create basically 10 articles or 10 rules that dictate what is acceptable towards human enhancement. And at the very top, Article 1 was, you have the right to bodily sovereignty. You've got control over your body, so no one can tell you can't and can't do whatever you want with your body, which is a fundamental human right. The next article was all about health. We've got a duty to the paramount of human health and the protection of human health. And that would be, giving these athletes access to healthcare or diagnostics and to ensure the choices that they make are healthy. And then you've got another article that is, every individual has the right to undertake risk. But when you start to combine all these things, risk aversity, someone's going to be very risk averse and then someone's not really going to care. Similarly, you could put all of the negatives to taking a compound or a substance and still not be unsure of what it's going to do in 15 or 20 years' time. I mean, the classic example was about 7 or 8 years ago when I first started speaking online. The very first thing I said was, give it 10 or 12 years and we'll have, a mental health crisis of all these young people using steroids, not realizing that it impacts their mental health. And sure enough, in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a big thing about taking care of your mental health and the effect that these substances have on your mental health. That if someone said to you, well, here's a drug and, it's going to make you the fastest, the strongest, and then 15 years later, we figure out, oh, well, when you turn 60, it's going to, make you develop Alzheimer's and dementia, and you're going to have 2 years to live. Not knowing that risk in the past, again, you come back to the argument of when they asked Olympic athletes if they died within 5 years, would they take something? And this often gets misconstrued in terms of the truth of that survey. Well, it wasn't all of them said yes, but a good majority of athletes were willing to take that risk of winning a gold medal and giving up a length of lifespan in order to be a champion. That when you try and define what is healthy, I could look at a set of blood work from a bodybuilder, having, years of experience looking at different types of bloods, different types of substances used, taking into consideration lifestyle, nutrition, and everything else, environment. And I'd say, within relative context, that person has a level of health. You show that same level of blood work to someone with no experience of PEDs, who's not been exposed to that level of athlete or patient or whatever, and they might turn around and say, oh, you're going to have a heart attack in 5 years. So it's defining, the biggest challenge here now is what is healthy. Someone, again, risk aversity might go, I don't care. Just if I'm going to have a heart attack in 5 years, fair enough. That's my risk aversity, And then another athlete might go, no way, I'm okay. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. That is too much of a risk. But maybe I'm still willing to take that compound, but at a very lower exposure where I'm getting some benefit, but not getting these risk side effects. And so you've got this balancing, and this was sort of again what I raised when it came to the discussions, was you're going to have to define what is healthy, and healthy is individually based. Some people are very health conscious and other people just don't care. You've got, again, risk aversity. Someone's going to be very, very cautious, and the other person's like, give me everything that's approved. I just want to, set amazing records that no one ever is going to achieve. And then you've got this whole thing of, you've got the right to take informed risk, is really how it is said. But in saying that, are you always going to have true informed risk if there's long-term consequences that are unknown? And then on top of that, you've got this right to your own bodily autonomy, but also you've got this right that there's a duty to protect healthcare. So it becomes very, very political in terms of, yes, everyone wants to see what the human race is capable of when you remove all barriers. Do whatever you want. Just set an amazing record. Do a sub 9 second 100-meter sprint. And then the other side is, if we do go down that path, how is that playing over then into society? Because we only have to see, how naive the human race was about 40 years ago towards performance enhancement. You've got all these amazing Olympic athletes at the pinnacle of athleticism winning gold medals, and then late 1980s, oh yeah, well, he took steroids, he took that substance. And all of a sudden the public completely demonized or stigmatized anabolic steroids or compounds, etc. You're all liars. One side to, I guess, having games like that is, again, one of the things is open transparency. So you have to be openly transparent within the realms of medical privacy, obviously. But, I argued that transparency, yes, is an amazing thing, and that we all know that a lot of top level athletes take substances and they'll deny that they use it from a sponsorship perspective and also from an image point of view. But you then have to view it that if you have someone who's lying about what they're using and they're misleading a generation of other athletes, and then eventually they really see the truth when they get to the point of a crossroads of, you're now at the pinnacle of amateur level, in order to go to the next step up professionally, you're going to have to make a choice about being either remaining natural or going down this route of enhancement that, to be honest, if you don't do it, 90% chance, unless you're extremely talented or you've got extremely favorable genetics, you're not going to keep up with the pace of the other competition. And you're forced either to retire early or just be a subpar competitor. So you've then have to realize that transparency could result in, I guess, like the epigenetics, influencing the current generation. We already see this with social media in that, you've got people glorifying, this is what anabolic steroids I'm taking, blatantly on social media. And now you're hyperpolarizing the image of athleticism or muscularity to a younger generation, thinking that they have to take these substances to look like that. And it, from a transparency perspective, that's great. We're all being transparent. We're saying exactly how it is. But now you're influencing these younger people to think, okay, well, it's acceptable to take these risks. And the other side of it is, from that influential perspective, do they really understand, again, from an informed risk perspective, what they're doing? Because when we see this glorification on social media, it normally goes hand in hand with other performance enhancement or other substance abuse. You see these guys partying, taking other class A drug stimulants on top of their steroid use, and they're not really setting the picture of like this epitome of health. So it's, you can see how complex trying to organize something like that is, because on one side everyone's like, yeah, just go and do whatever you want, but if they go and do whatever they want from a transparency perspective, ideally, I think the beauty of something like this is data management or data gathering. So you're allowing the use of these things, but you're diligently tracking what's happening to the physiology of the person and the psychology of the person. So then you can build better models of, I guess at the crux of it, human evolution. How can we influence the design of the human to incorporate these benefits that these drugs are putting on our biology that naturally our own biology will never achieve?
I think, there's a lot in there that I think we could pick apart. I think something that you said is really relevant, especially where, part of where I'd like to see maybe this conversation go. So I myself am involved in competitive bodybuilding, as ET knows. Like, I'm quite transparent about my own PED use. And a huge part of that, and I think I'm lucky, I wasn't 21 when I started. I was a little like in my late 20s and now into my 30s. A huge element of that transparency is the risk factors that are associated with it. And I think my personal opinion, especially for people that do have, I suppose, any kind of authority or a voice, that transparency comes with a sense of responsibility of not just, this is how these things work from a performance enhancement standpoint, but these are all of the other considerations to take into account. And I end up doing a lot of consultations with you. It's usually young 20s, I'd say like 80% males, sometimes females, but the vast majority of that conversation is usually, how can you start this stuff in a way that is as safe as possible? As you said, health within that certain context and not being incredibly reckless. I think a big part of that is just maturity, like knowing what you're getting into, what the potential long-term risks are, and the behaviors that you need to adopt to mitigate some of those negatives as much as possible. So I'm curious from your standpoint, if we kind of streamline this conversation, because I know people that listen to this are often sort of in bodybuilding or powerlifting, kind of in that realm. If you had somebody who came to you, for example, or somebody who was interested in sort of their first introduction into performance enhancement, let's say for physique sport, as just sort of a general case, where would you start somebody off, and what would be the considerations that they should make as they start to venture into that?
Yeah, it's a great starting point and a great question, in that I always go by where you stand now currently genetically. So, and that's where, when I first started like educating, these arbitrary number cycles online are just for fun, because you can't
500 milligrams of test per cycle.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the best example is, I had a multiple world champion natural bodybuilder came to me in his early 20s surrounding advice on wanting to move out of natural federations that he was winning without any effort, won it 2 or 3 years in a row, and was like, right, the IFBB is the next point to call. And not to say anything about the IFBB requiring drug use, but in order to achieve the physique, to stand amongst, some of the top physiques, you have to make a choice. So this guy clearly was an elite level athlete, because when we look at the blood work, he has a testosterone level of 37 nanomole naturally. So this guy is sitting, 1.5 times pretty much where someone sits naturally. So I'm not too good with US numbers, but on average, the UK average is about 20 nanomole, which I think is 700 nanograms per deciliter, I think. So if we extrapolate this up, I think 37 is about 1,600, I think, nanograms per deciliter. So extremely high natural testosterone. If we then look, and this is sort of where then I start to apply these, studied dosages of what certain compounds achieve within the body. We know from a very nice study that 250 milligrams of testosterone creates a serum level of about 45 nanomole. So we can use that as a benchmark. 250 milligrams is 45 nanomoles. If you then apply that, so we've got this amazing genetic elite top level bodybuilder, and then I've got, I'm not going to say an average guy, but you've got just this guy who trains in the gym, wants to look good, and is interested in hormone use. And now he looks at his blood work, and his total testosterone level is 12 nanomole, which is at the very bottom of the natural range, or like I think maybe 400, 350 in US terms. The two of them taking 250 milligrams are going to have completely different effects. Right. You've got one guy going from 12 up to 45, which, you know, in theory is nearly 4 times the natural level. And then you've got a guy who's at 37 going to 45, which is about a 30% increase. So you have to view, you know, in terms of like the individual biochemistries, where they sit genetically is what's going to dictate the response from the drug. And even then, it doesn't guarantee that everything is going to be positive. The guy who's at 12 going to 45, quadrupling nearly his testosterone level, might see amazing benefits and get no side effects. So he has very low estrogen production, very low or normal DHT production. So he doesn't get any of the gynecomastia or man boobs. He doesn't get any of the acne or hair loss. But then we go to the elite level bodybuilder who's gone from 37 to 45. And all of a sudden he's riddled with acne because that 30% increase in total testosterone resulted in quite a bit of it going to estrogen, or resulted in quite a bit of it going to DHT. So there is no guarantee that where you pick is going to be an ergogenic aid, and there is no arbitrary starting position. It goes right back to the individual biochemistry. That's like the most basic hormone standpoint. You could go like even one step further, and the guy who's at 12 nanomole could have on his blood work skewed lipids, skewed cholesterol. Now, is that because he has low hormones? Is it because of his diet, his nutrition, his lifestyle? Is it because of genetics with familial elevated cholesterol? And if he takes that testosterone as his first, you know, cycle or whatever, we know that that impacts your lipid metabolism. It impacts your cholesterol. So you're going to have suppressed HDL and elevated LDL as a consequence. Is his cholesterol going to get worse by increasing his testosterone? Or is it actually going to get better? Is his metabolic flexibility in terms of the metabolic dysfunction of low hormone improving from having more testosterone in like a testosterone replacement fashion? So it's not like, you know, this whole thing of here's a blueprint of your first cycle is 300 milligrams a test or 500 milligrams a test. You know, what's a good steroid cycle? There is no good steroid cycle to start with. It again comes back to what's happening in your body currently and where you are willing to dictate that response to. And so I remember having a conversation with that elite bodybuilder, and my basic advice was double your natural testosterone. Put double the amount of total testosterone into the system and observe what happens. Do you get side effects? Do you start making a lot more estrogen and DHT? Do you start seeing blood pressure increases, you know, mood disturbance, all these negatives? Or do you start seeing positives where your strength increases, your recovery increases, your libido, your mental energy, your drive, all these positive things? That exposure, so he's gone from 37 maybe up to, double it, 70 nanomole, which in terms of a dose could be like 350 milligrams in a normally metabolizing person. So now he's going in at 350, but the big guy at the gym told him, oh, anything less than 500 is a waste of time. He's having to listen to some level of logic versus some level of anecdote. And I remember this guy done what we discussed in terms of like took the hypothetical advice and implemented it, saw great benefit, and then came back to me for like a follow-up of, what do I do from here? What's the choices I've got? And we went into the further nuance of how you progress into, more exotic setups and other things to consider. But I'll never forget, he went to his 3 training partners and explained what he discussed with me about doubling his natural test level. And they laughed at him. And all 3 of them started a cycle of 500 test and 400 tread. And he was like,
oh my God.
And Ryan probably can appreciate this, but I basically just said to this guy, leave your friends to do whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
They will soon eventually realize what they've done is a big, massive mistake, but more so see that they've fallen for the bias of a steroid dealer selling them these things. And he said, yeah, I've got no plan whatsoever to change. Everything that we've done is absolutely amazing. But he was baffled that they wouldn't understand this. I won't even say it's cautious. It's just a stepping stone. Double your natural test level and see what happens. If you can't, I've said this several times, if you can't build more muscle size or increase your strength on double your natural testosterone, you got no right to take anything else or any other compound. I mean, it just baffles me that someone's not willing to test and see, okay, if I double my test level, these are the positives I got, these are the negatives. Okay, next time, do I triple it or do I stay at double? Did I really get everything out of that doubling in terms of progress? And everyone wants results yesterday. So they're willing to jump up to 500 milligrams thinking that more is going to be better. And it really isn't. Yes, we can't say that the more you take, the more muscle mass you may gain. But this is a steady titration as you get bigger and bigger and bigger. You're going to need, obviously, more dose to facilitate pushing past weight plateaus or accruing more muscle tissue. But it's not like going from 0 to 500 in one go or 0 to 1,000. That to me is just pure naivety of thinking that steroids are magic or performance enhancement is magic. So the starting point is always, in my view, assess your genetic limitations. So where your hormones are sitting naturally, where your health is sitting naturally, looking, like Ryan said, in terms of like how well are they eating? How well are they training? Have they really ticked all the boxes to say, okay, I'm at a crossroads now that my natural testosterone isn't serving me anymore. I would like a bit more muscle mass or like more benefits to speak, and then taking the leap, as opposed to being in the gym 6 months and then going, right, it's time to increase my testosterone level to get bigger, when they've never mastered these basics. And then that further compounds into that they take these things and then they're never coached on either how to stop them or how to take advantage or benefit from what they gained from the performance enhancement. And so you end up seeing like what they always classically joke about of the inflated man, and then you stop taking steroids and you shrank rapidly. Some of that, yes, is pure fluid retention, and the ones that don't really understand how these drugs work will fall for massively aromatizing drugs in terms of like testosterone D-ball or Dianabol, get completely bloated in terms of fluid retention. And of course, when you remove that stimulus, the fluid retention dissipates and they shrink because they never gained muscle tissue to begin with. They gained body weight. And so when you utilize these things, if they understand surrounding nutrition, recovery, training, all the basics, that would be like the entry point to stepping up, they should be able to maintain close to 90% of what the performance enhancement done for them, because the pillars surrounding how to sleep, eat, train correctly are still in play. They just understand that with removal of the drug, they can't train as frequently, they can't recover as quickly. So if they can understand that principle and adjust their training and recovery based off what they can do now naturally, they'll still retain quite a lot of the strength that they technically gained, provided the recovery and the nutrition, everything is taken care of. So you have to go into it knowing all avenues of what's your entrance, but what's also your exit strategy.
I know ET probably has a couple of questions, but I think you and I are 100% aligned on this. I just want to share sort of a couple anecdotes, like case studies, kind of contrasting it. So I have a client of mine who's in his early 30s now. I believe it was about a year and a half ago was sort of his first exposure into sort of the PED realm. And we have never gone above 250 milligrams of test a week. And people were shocked that, we've used so little. And he's gained probably, between 20 to 25 pounds of tissue in a year and a half. And there's just never been, and, for him, he's not going to be a high level competitive bodybuilder. So the risk also isn't worth pushing anything to any exotic levels. But this guy, is as jacked as he's ever been in his early 30s, running what people would consider to be a low dose of testosterone. And then I compare that to, I had a client who came to me at one point who kind of mid to late 30s. At the time, he was running 1,200 milligrams of testosterone, which for context, I'm as high as I've ever been and I'm running 875. I'm 250 pounds with ab veins and stuff. And this guy was 180 pounds, skinny fat. And the conversation nobody ever wants to have is, as you and I both know, of course drugs work, but they also aren't magic in the absence of great training, great diet, prioritizing recovery. This is something that comes up on this podcast quite a bit, I guess, because I'm the guy that always brings up drugs at some point. But the thing that I always talk to people about is all of these things have a synergy with one another. If you were to look, I'm probably finally at the point now, competing at sort of a national level where, my stack design looks like I'm a competitive bodybuilder, but it's very incremental increases over the period of several years. And I had even made a post somewhat recently where over a 2.5 year period of time, and I'm pretty sure the same thing. I think my test started I ran like a 300 milligram cycle test by itself. And over 2.5 years, I think I've put, legitimately 40 to 50 pounds of tissue on. And I would say, while those compounds obviously play a massive role, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that, I put the most amount of focus in, I think John Jewett talked about this on the last roundtable. I'm always trying to find ways to make my training more effective. I'm always trying to find ways where my diet is better, where my digestion is better. That's 90% of where my focus is. I think Justin Harris, I've spoken with him before, and I love a line that he says. He's like, if you take a handful of gym bros and put them together, all they want to talk about is what drugs they're taking. And if you take a bunch of pros together and you lump them together, all they talk about is what their diet is. Because eventually you get to the point where you realize most people really aren't varying outside of a handful of compounds. Dosages might go up and down depending on the individual, but people are probably running test, primo or mass, GH, maybe a couple of other things, but that's the foundation of it. And then everyone realizes that what matters is what they're eating, how they're training, and how they're sleeping.
Yeah.
Comes back to the fundamentals.
Even when I came out of retirement last year of like a what if to compete again after, like when I last competed in 2022, that was when I really understood the principle of recovery in response to contest prep, because I hadn't competed in 5 years. So when the trainer I had, Aaron, was basically like, "Oh, you're not going to train any higher than 3 reps in reserve," I was like, "Yeah, Aaron, okay." And then when I started to understand the principles of like reps and reserve, and when you're an experienced trainer and know how to train with reps and reserve properly, that prep, when I got to the end in 2022, I remember like saying to Aaron, this feels like cheating. Like there's not one day that I'm dreading going into the gym to train legs. I'm not like, oh, 4 leg days to the stage, 3 leg days to the stage. It was literally, oh, let's go in and train today. And that was basically because you're not burying yourself, that your nervous system is fried, and then your nervous system saying, feed me more to try and recover more. And then the other side of it is, well, you can't eat more, so let's take more drugs. And that's the spiral that happens with guys raising the dose when it comes to like contest prep of you're clearly not recovering properly, so now you're putting more drugs in to force that recovery or to basically mask that poor recovery. And like even last year compared to 2 years previously, it was a quarter of the 2 years prior was what was required to get in shape. And like,
wow,
this was basically, 125 tests and then putting in on top of it 300 primo. That was it. And then the rest of it was, small sprinkle of the other good stuff at like 10 milligrams on training days only. So when it came to the very end, my total diet stack or contest prep stack was like sub 700 milligrams. And
that's wild.
And that was with a stage weight of 194 pounds, I think, or 195 pounds. And that was like 4%.
You were shredded too.
Shredded. That was like, again, food consumption. My training day calories were like 3,200. The prep last year was not a prep. Last year was just living my life, is the way I put it. And then I just decided to get on stage for the fun of it. That it really showed me how flawed the last like 10 years of competitive bodybuilding has been. And what I really hope is what I seen last year, a lot of other guys come to realize and start to see about like the efficiency of the mitochondria. And when you get that in play,
yes.
If anyone has ever done a prep, they'll have noticed the cognitive deficit or the cognitive decline that happens as prep goes on. You're just sort of towards the end of it, you're alive, but you're not alive. You're just trying to get to the finish line and be as content when you get on stage as you can be. Whereas last year, being so switched on, everything being so optimized and everything else, you could take in absolutely everything. It wasn't like, oh, show day's here and then show day's gone. You're like, oh, where did that prep go? Because that does happen for a lot of guys. They completely lose sight. You just have this tunnel vision of show day comes, they place or they don't place, and then the next day it's into off season or ever. And they never really look back, even if they end up winning an overall or winning the nationals or winning their pro card. The day happens so fast because you were so tunnel visioned that they don't actually remember what happened or take in the journey. And that, last year, having that recovery priority, with training, with nutrition, there was never a day where it's like, oh, I don't want to do this, or I have to do cardio, or I have to go train, or I have to fit this work in today, but I don't really feel like doing it because I'm tired from not sleeping properly the night before. We start to see that, when we leverage these compounds, it really does come back to the basics. And everyone hates basics because they think that these drugs are amazing and they unlock all these opportunities. It really comes back to, like, again, with training, how well are you training? How, I guess, intentively you're training, what effort you're placing into your training, especially when Aaron said to me about reps and reserve, I came from the mentality of like DC training logbook. Logbook says I have to do 8 plates aside today. I'm going, regardless of how I feel, that's what I am going to beat. And it really took, where that sort of came to a halt was when I nearly paralyzed myself with the RDL 4 years ago, where my spine completely shifted off with a hamstring tear that I didn't even know about going into a training session. That after that, I was like, yes, it's impressive to be brutally strong, but moving away from A to B doesn't really necessarily drive muscle protein synthesis or muscle protein accretion. It looks great on Instagram doing an 8 or 9 plate aside hack squat, but when you get out of it, was that really just brute strength moving that weight A to B, or was it your quads, your hamstrings, and your glutes that moved the weight? And that really served me then that, okay, you don't need to do these brutally stupid lifts for strength purposes. If you're going to be a bodybuilder, doing a set with 4 or 5 plates aside with continuous tension and continuous intent on the tissue that's lifting the weight serves your bodybuilding career better than an 8 plate or 9 plate aside hack squat just to stick it on Instagram.
Man, I have a million follow-up questions.
Watching you writing stuff down the whole time.
I have a million things that I want to say, and we obviously won't have time for all of them today, but I want to just circle back and double click perhaps on a few things. You just now highlighted one of the central themes of the courses that we teach, which is not only using anatomy as a means of informing your cueing, but also choosing exercise selection based off of the outcomes that you're looking for. You think of so many folks who are looking to maximize muscle hypertrophy. They assume that if they move more weight in space, that will be essentially like is a lead metric perhaps to the outcomes that they're looking for of, increased muscularity and those types of things. And it really isn't the case. And, you're talking about, in this case of this hamstring tear that led to a back injury, which sounds horrific, by the way. And I had no idea about it. My face probably gave away when you were talking about it. I was shocked. I was like, oh my God, I hope he's okay. But talking about how, lifting in an intentional manner and allowing the outcome that you're looking for to be the dictator of the type of technique and the exercises you select, I think is fantastic. And I'm really happy that you brought that forward. Yeah. I wanted to just really quickly come back to this conversation, if you don't mind. Earlier, you were talking about this natural athlete who wanted to dip his toes in the water when it came to PEDs as a means of going in the direction of IFBB, and that you gave him an initial recommendation that was quite smaller than perhaps what some of his peers decided to run, and it brought up for me I would say a question, which is that it seems like when it comes to these recommendations that you do or that you make for your patients and your athletes, that it seems very trial and error, in contrast to being like, just do this and you'll be fine, which for me seems like a really big misconception. And I think it's just worth kind of double clicking on that. Although you can be really well informed with regards to pharmacology, that the outcomes are not necessarily, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the outcomes are not necessarily 100% predictable. And that even when you really know your shit, there's an element of trial and error, testing, gaining feedback, and then modifying as you go. And that for me was, of all the things we talked about over the last little, perhaps the last 15, 20 minutes, was one of the things that really stood out, like the importance of being thorough and having an informed team that are a part of this process.
Yeah, I mean, even like what you touched on, let's even say this person goes down the route of performance enhancement and doesn't check anything got to do with their blood work. Like, it'd be the equivalent of going in and training the gym and tracking nothing. Like, not looking what you lifted the week before, what your sort of progression is going to be over the next couple of weeks. The other side of it is, and again, this comes at, if you do go down this pathway, is you're going to check your serum blood work. You're going to do testing to give you information or data to feed back off. Same way you track your sleep or your calories or your recovery, you're going to track your health metrics. But more importantly, for example, like you said, there is no predicted outcome because human physiology and human biochemistry isn't static and it's not stable between individuals. Right. So even when we look at liver metabolism, someone's going to be able to handle, for it, like the easiest probably example for someone to understand here is alcohol. Someone can drink a lot of alcohol, not get drunk. Someone can have one drink and drunk immediately. You have different metabolic flexibilities in terms of how your liver, for example, the liver enzymes will work. And again, this was another concept that I introduced years ago, is you've got slow metabolizers and you've got fast metabolizers. That starting position, like I said, of 250 milligrams creating a level of 45, that's someone in a normal, stable population of liver metabolism. You could have someone who has fast liver metabolism, so now 250 milligrams is creating a level that could be the same as 125, so they clear the drug 100% faster than a normal person.
Right.
Or you could have slow metabolism, where that 45 becomes 90 because they've got 100% slower clearance, so the drug stays in the system for double the length of time. So this, like, test, don't guess perspective means that you have a starting point that after 6 weeks, it takes about 6 weeks or 6 half-lives for a drug to stabilize. So if he is choosing testosterone enanthate or testosterone cypionate, after 6 weeks, check your hormone level. So let's see where your hormone metabolism lies. But also you're doing a validity check, because obviously unless they've been in receipt of a prescription or a pharmaceutical product, they could have fake testosterone, so they're just pinning oil which has nothing in it. They could be taking a product which is half dosed, that someone's cut corners and sold them an underdosed product, or they could have the real deal and now they have an exact measurable level of their hormones, but also around that hormone picture of, well, my lipids now have changed by 10%. My kidney function has stayed the same. My liver enzymes are slightly elevated, but that's because of training more intensely. They're able to build a picture around that data acquisition. And it's no different. Like, if they're going to go down this route, they'd be tracking their training and recovery and everything else as a data perspective. Health, a natural bodybuilder to speak, should still probably get their bloods done once a year to check their natural hormone levels and the impact that natural bodybuilding or natural competition can bring. Even from a nutrition perspective, they could be deficient in certain nutrients and their blood work's going to flag it. But their data isn't going to be as fluid as an enhanced comparator who should be catching data points probably every 12 or 16 weeks.
Cool.
I think it's funny. So just as an aside, because I don't think we'll have time today, I already know I'm going to want to book a part 2.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well.
I was like, how am I going to fit in talking about the mitochondrial support in 13 minutes? So I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to. So I do think when you're talking about blood work, you bring up a really great point. People should be getting it done. Besides just looking at the obvious, we're just talking about, testosterone levels, estradiol levels. You mentioned blood lipids. There are certain, let's say maybe predictable risks that exist within sort of the PED world and the anabolic world. What would you say are major risk factors that people should be aware of and things that they should be paying attention to on their blood work that they're regularly getting done?
Yeah, that's another good one. I mean, kidney disease risk, very, I guess, I'm not going to say manageable, but very easy to catch and early intervene based on blood pressure. I mean, blood pressure at its standpoint is something that should be tracked daily, if not at least 3 times per week. And what you're going to use from that end is with your blood work is to look at kidney filtration rate, and that same story earlier of what defines healthy. A creatinine level on blood work can be elevated in a natural athlete from training, from eating high protein, but all of a sudden their kidney filtration rate is coming back at, low 60s, and you have your doctor saying, oh, you've got stage 3 kidney disease, which if they then done a calculation of kidney filtration with respect to body surface area, or in looking at the potential of more muscle mass, the predictability of their kidney function then massively improves, because the equation that is used is for a normal person who doesn't eat a high protein diet, who doesn't train in the gym. So when you're looking at your bloods, the change in trend of creatinine would be more of an observation on what the actual number is. So if, for example, the trend, your creatinine, you've trained every day for like the last 4 days, and you've gone in and got blood work, and your creatinine says 100, and the next time you go and get bloods done, same bias of training, nutrition, whatever else, creatine supplementation, and now your creatinine's at 130, well, now unless you've gained massive amounts of muscle tissue in a space of time, something has changed at the kidney's physiology to allow more creatinine to be in your bloodstream. And now that becomes a red flag of that is a trend that has changed, as opposed to your marker being red. Same with blood lipids. A 10% reduction in HDL from steroids and a 10% increase in LDL, is that directly going to increase your cardiovascular disease risk by 10 or 15%? You have to go one step further and look at, the particle size, the particle type of the LDL and HDL. So if you're just doing a regular lipid panel of LDL-C and HDL-C, you're just looking at the total concentration and not really what's one step beyond that underneath. And then even furthermore, we know that a lot of cardiac dysfunction really comes from oxidative stress, whether that is from cardiac fibrosis or myocyte fibrosis, down to oxidation of the lipids themselves and the immune dysfunction or endothelial dysfunction that comes from that. So blood work, yeah, you can get your cholesterol panel done, you can get your LDL could be slightly raised. Again, from a UK perspective, it could sit at 3.2, which might be, I think, 170, I think, in US measurements. I'd have to check. I'm never very good at converting, but you'd be just borderline outside your range. But if you were then to assess the particle structure of that LDL-C, so how much of it is small, dense, how much of it is large, buoyant, how many of those particles, LDL particles, have apolipoprotein B, which we know, biases dumping cholesterol into tissue. How many of the LDL particles are lipoprotein A, LPA, and how many of them express PLA2, phospholipase A2, which is a marker of blood lipid oxidation, but also unstable plaques within the body express PLA2 as well. So now you can gather, step further in terms of your data acquisition to assess your risk better than a surface level analysis. And so you might have someone who has a skewed ratio of lipids, but when you really get down into the lower elements of it, that risk is probably very marginal. If, for example, the small dense particles, the ApoB, all of that stays low normal in respect of where they were when they were natural, other than their liver making more LDL, it's not increased specifically the risk of cardiovascular disease. And that's where it gets very technical, like I said, in terms of what is the definition of health and healthy when we look really at these core markers that should be checked rather than the top surface level. Other things, I guess, to not ignore would be iron metabolism. So of your body, you've got two main oxidants, and that is your glucose and your iron. They're the two main endogenous oxidants that contribute to oxidative stress. We know that having more testosterone is going to impair your iron metabolism, so it stays in the body longer. So it inhibits hepcidin, which is the enzyme that breaks down your iron. So now you've got more iron floating about the body, which, unless it is being incorporated into hemoglobin, could oxidize your tissue, causing oxidative stress. So paying attention to iron both in serum, but also paying attention, the one marker that gives us a big insight is ferritin. And ferritin is the storage form of iron, which, to be honest, for most people should be way down towards the low end of the normal range. Because ferritin of itself, when it's in the bloodstream, that marker of ferritin has no iron in it. It's just detecting the protein of ferritin. Ferritin is stored in your tissue, mainly your liver. So when it's in your bloodstream, it's actually been released from tissue, and the iron that was in the ferritin has been dumped off somewhere else. So it's a sign of iron overload or iron dumping. So if you have elevated ferritin, you have to then figure out then, why do I have like liver cell death? Why do I have potential oxidative stress from that ferritin? And then working your way back of, how do I support it? What in the environment or nutrition or even the substances themselves are affecting my iron metabolism?
Amazing.
So
yeah, I mean, like Ryan was mentioning prior to asking this question regarding blood work and those types of things. We have so many follow-up questions. I'm writing on both sides of my sheet. Hopefully if you're willing, I'm sure I'm speaking for Ryan as well. We would love to have you on here for a second time to really kind of dig into some of these details.
Yeah, of course.
I had just to interject, because I had told a friend who very much is a fan of yours, Dean, that we were going to have you on. And he was like, oh, yeah, he had given me questions because he's really into the mitochondrial stuff. I was like, for sure, we'll talk about it.
Yeah. But yeah, so on that note, I think, Ryan, if you're cool with it, let's move towards, we have some rapid fire questions prepared for you to help ourselves and our listeners get to know our guests to a greater degree. So Ryan, I'll let you take over from here.
For sure. Yeah, so as ET said, we do a series of rapid fire questions at the end with any of our guests the first time that they come on. And the idea is, first thing that pops in your head, quick answer, and then on to the next. So question number one is, what is your favorite book, movie, and concert?
My favorite book, movie, concert. Probably my favorite ever concert was the first time I seen Metallica. When I was 15, I think 14,
that was my first CD.
14 or 15 of years of age, I think I was, 2003, I think, or 2002. It's a long time ago. Favorite book, I love anything that was by Dan Brown, so I don't know really anything out of that. The last one he wrote, Origin, was a very interesting story, so that's the one that speaks out, like Da Vinci Code and everything else. Movie... movies are so many.
No, it's so hard.
So I guess when I was younger, probably Die Hard was a classic.
Nice. Cool. What is your favorite and least favorite food?
My least favorite food. So I have it's called, I guess, hyperpalatability from a genetic perspective. So if you want to see me throw up, cucumbers and watermelon and onions.
Okay.
So cucumbers taste like battery acid to me. It's one of these things of super taster gene. So if they're like, anytime I've gotten like years ago, if I was eating food and there was like salad and there's a bit of cucumber mixed in with it, yeah, it was sure way fire to make me feel quite sick.
Wow.
My favorite food, not that I can have it anymore, really, would have probably been probably in the past pizza, but with being celiac, all these nice things go out the window. So that's probably another thing to have a discussion over, is all gut health.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Proudest moment outside of business?
One of the proudest moments, and as cliched as is, becoming a dad. It's probably something that's cliched, but aside from throwing out the obvious cliches, I'd say I was chosen in 2010 to attend the Nobel laureates meeting in Lindau. So this was a week-long conference with all of the Nobel Prize winners of medicine, physics, chemistry, biology. And so they gave lectures for the week. I had lunch with them. So that was a bit surreal to sit at dinner and pick the brains of all these incredible humans.
Your favorite athlete growing up?
My favorite athlete growing up. I would have been a very avid fan of Gaelic football growing up. So the Dublin goalkeeper Stephen Cluxton would have been my idol, and I was fortunate in that I had him as my goalkeeping coach for a while.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
What 3 values guide you?
At the very, very top, I guess integrity, in terms of staying true to what I've always done. And that was one of the core principles, obviously, of how myself and Lee established, supplement needs and the range, was being very integrated into ensuring that people's health and everything else was a priority than being a strict business. I guess with the integrity, like transparency of being able to educate, but also come from a place of experience. I always sort of find it funny that, other people often quite joke about smaller guys giving very technical details on training, yet they've never really walked the walk. That being transparent, being able to have had that experience or knowledge or personal experience to pass it on. And then a third one, I guess, would be to be committed, and be committed in every aspect that you, I guess, choose to do in terms of like your personal life. So staying committed to your relationships, to your family values themselves, the sort from these core values, staying committed when things go wrong, and being able to keep on course. I think commitment, if you can have good commitment, then discipline comes very easy to commitment, and both hand in hand, I guess.
Right.
I love that answer.
Cool.
What is your favorite and least favorite lift?
My least favorite lift used to be Bulgarian split squats. I used to look at them on my logbook with absolute disdain. My favorite lift of it, on the reverse of it, was probably hack squats. Hack squat or leg press. As much as probably all disdain leg training, it used to be one of my favorites.
What's one misconception about you?
I guess when people meet me in person, they're like, you're a lot more friendly than I anticipated you to be from an online perspective. So, I think, that's probably one of the misconceptions, that people think that I'm more arrogant, I guess, than I actually am. And that's probably because when I was trying to educate in the beginning, I was just so cutthroat of cutting through all the BS of spade to spade. We'll have an argument, but I'm not. I guess as I've gotten older, I've stayed out of a lot of arguments online now. That it's just I put education out there. If you want to believe it, great. If you don't, that's your choice. And there's no point in you arguing with me or me arguing with you over it. You're not going to change your mind, and I'm not going to change mine. So it's something that I think I've matured as I've gotten older.
One place that you would love to visit? Aside from Turkey for your hair.
Yes. Well, I've been quite lucky, and I've got to travel quite a lot when I was younger, and when I was a kickboxer and everything else. So I've seen quite a bit. But one place that I know it's on my wife's list is to go to Greenland or Iceland and see the Northern Lights, like Reykjavik or something like that, and experience that sort of climate versus here.
Right.
And our final question is, what is one hard truth that trainers or coaches who are trying to grow their business need to hear?
One hard truth. I think going back to what I said about even like online art with ego, your ego is going to be the main thing that limits your growth in terms of whether or not you choose to listen to someone's opinion, whether that's on business, an idea, even a concept that you're trying to understand, how you deliver education. Your ego is going to get in the way of whether you take an opportunity or not. And that even comes back to like imposter syndrome. A lot of people won't progress in terms of being afraid to say something because someone's going to criticize them. And if anyone's listening here, you're always going to have people criticizing you, regardless of whether they are an enemy or a friend. It's whether or not you choose to accept their criticism as being a truth, or being able to look at it as a growth opportunity. But your ego, and again, that comes back even to myself of, I think as you get older, rather than having a straightforward argument of, yes, I'm right, you're wrong, being able to look at your ego and go, okay, well, that person has a different point of view to mine. Your personal bias might say to yourself, okay, they are wrong, I am right. But being able to turn around and say, okay, well, what they're saying is true to their own bias. What can I take from what they're saying? Even though I might not agree with it, is there anything valuable that I can take from what they've said to me? And that can sometimes, with that ego, you'll turn and go, what you're saying is completely nonsense. And then you'll actually turn around and go, actually, sorry, you were right in what you said to me. In the moment, my brain had its own personal objective, and what you're saying actually makes sense. So, yeah, I think ego, we can all learn from dissociating from our ego.
Yeah.
Incredible. Thank you so much for all those answers. I really want to thank you for today. I find today's conversation has really ignited like a very palpable sense of curiosity. I feel like I could keep talking to you for hours. And I just really want to thank you for donating your time and for sharing all of your expertise with us today. I'm sure that those that listen to this are going to, if they haven't heard about you, are going to want to learn more about who you are and some of your initiatives. And so could you please plug those for our listeners?
Yeah, so if anyone wants to follow me and some of my ramblings or educations, it's Dean STM on Instagram. We have our company, Supplement Needs, which is a UK-based company, so it's a bit of a roadblock at the moment in international shipping to Canada. But if you want to see some of the formulas that I've created that surrounded all the aspects of pharmacology, it's supplementneeds.co.uk, and Dr. Dean will save 10% if anyone wants to try any of the products. And then I have an education platform, SN Education, which is our sort of education branch of the company. And that's sort of where I invest every month, a good portion of my time to creating like lecture style format videos surrounding everything we've covered here, like blood work, PEDs, and then there's a members forum community where anyone who joins can ask me basically anything. And I love getting into all the nitty gritty and giving them studies to go off and read for their own knowledge.
I love that. That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Ryan, do you have any closing questions before we wrap up?
just another 90 minutes talking about mitochondrial health. So
we will book it in. Absolutely, it'd be a pleasure.
sure.
Amazing. I would honestly, I would absolutely love that. And once again, thank you so much for everything today. It's been really fun getting to know you. I think first and foremost, I'm so surprised that when you mentioned that people find you friendlier, I was like, what the fuck? You're like so incredibly kind.
I think it comes back to, like I said, as you get older, your ego and everything matures a little bit.
Sure.
My late 20-year-old self and early 30-year-old self was a little more blunt and direct to trolls and anyone that wanted to get in my way. So when people
and social media is hard too.
It's so hard, yeah.
When people meet me at like expos, like, oh, you're so friendly, and they have this sort of image of you being this person that's sort of up here, but beyond everyone else, that they're like, you're so far from what they anticipate me to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think like if anyone was confused or if there was any further confusion, hopefully today's podcast will help let some of that or put some of that to rest. Once again, my friend, honestly, thank you so much. And I really genuinely look forward to part 2. And I hope you have a really fantastic day.
Thanks a million.
Thanks. Ciao.
Cheers.